Time now to have a look at exactly what is happening here. We're still waiting for the much-awaited second briefing of the day by IEBC Chair Wafula Chebukati, so that we can basically find out how the tallying process is taking place here at the National Tallying Center. We expect Chebukati, of course, to tell us how many constituencies have managed to deliver their Form 34 to this location. Earlier on, remember, we had an interview with the Commissioner in charge of ICT, Justice Nyangaya, and he alluded to the fact that only 2 constituencies had managed to deliver their Form 34A here, and that was about 334 thereabouts. And so you would expect that the number has really changed, and of course, so we are expecting to hear more from Wafula Chebukati. And as we wait for that, it's time now to shift gears and, of course, look at what is the view of this election from an international observer's, point of view. Joining me on the set is the Deputy Chief Observer of the European Union Election Observation Mission. This is Dr.Beata Rozumilowicz. She's joining us. I hope I got it right. Eh?
That's perfect.
Very good. So tell me this. I mean, you're leading a delegation of about 180 people. That's whose right. work is to walk around the country and exactly to have a look at the voting process and now make a statement or a report out of this. So far, what have you discovered?
Yeah, so we've been here for nearly a month and a half, and we've been looking at all aspects of the election process. So we recognize that elections are not just about election day, but they're really about before elections, during the elections, but also importantly after the elections. And so we're here with a team of 13 analysts in Nairobi, but also with nearly 50 long-term observers throughout the country in 39 counties. And we're looking at everything from the legal framework to the way that the election administration works, but also the role of media. For the first time in Kenya, we have a social media analyst who is conducting a robust social media monitoring. And we also have an election technology expert to look at the technology aspects of the election, supplemented by political analysis, supplemented by other types of analysts who are looking at various aspects of the process. And so today we made our preliminary statement of findings, and it really is the first sort of evaluation of what has come before end of election day, where we had nearly 200 observers out in the field in polling stations looking at the voting, the counting, the tabulation, and all the way up to the bomas where we still have observers present. And so really looking at all of those aspects.
In the preliminary report, what are you saying, or what have you said in the report?
Yeah, so we come and evaluate an election in any country that we're invited in, and we've also had election observers in Poland who do the same job, but against the national legislation in the first place, but also against international principles and international obligations that a country has signed up to. So in the case of Kenya, the ICCPR or the UDHR or other types of international treaties which really stipulate and call for genuine and democratic elections. And so we're looking at that picture through the lens of how genuine a process is. And today we found that in fact, fundamental freedoms were respected in these elections. So the right to association, the right to assembly, the right to expression, and those are all very fundamental principles to a democratic process. We also did find that there were certain procedural elements that could stand improvement, but I think that's something that's been discussed widely both yesterday and today in Kenya.
So what sticks out, when it comes to areas of improvement, what would you say is the most urgent issue that needs to be addressed?
So I think in the first place, the election is still ongoing, and so we still continue to observe and monitor, and we'll be following the tabulation very closely. We still have those 180 people around the country looking at the constituency tabulation centres, following those materials to the BOMAS to see that the process concludes in the transparent way that it should. But we also found that there are certain procedural elements that could have been better. And for instance, there was the late decision of the appellate court on the issue of printed voter registers. And so there was some confusion in polling stations on election day. And we very much hope that these kinds of elements in the future can maybe be decided a little bit earlier so that the process is clearer, especially for those people who are implementing the elections in polling stations. And there were nearly 300,000 people doing that work, and really hard work where they were involved for days, sleeping overnight in polling stations, and so that work really needs to be recognized.
Mm-hmm. When you look at the IEBC's preparedness, to conduct this election, what conclusions do you make?
Yeah, so we found that the IEBC acted efficiently, they acted professionally, especially in those logistical operational elements at the beginning of the process. As we came closer to election day, however, there were many open questions that needed to be resolved, and there were many court cases that were still pending, which may have had an impact on that process. And so we have analyzed that and commented upon that in our report.
Mm-hmm. What have you said?
We've said that those processes should come earlier. We have also found that the candidate registration, because it was conducted late, then pushed the timelines later and later for the Election Commission on fundamental aspects. Mm-hmm. And so perhaps in the future that could be looked at to have those timelines moved forward.
Mm-hmm. What about when the issues of transparency? Would you say this election was transparent enough?
I think transparency is always a challenge for every country, and there were many elements where the Commission tried to make those elections more transparent. I think it was a very positive step to have media, to have civil society, to have party agents be able to have the forms uploaded into the public portal, to have that publicly available and to be able to report on that in real time. And hopefully those kinds of transparency measures really improve people's confidence in the process. At the same time, transparency also is about the way in which commissions work, and some of those procedures are maybe not as understandable to some of the commission members as they should be.
Mm-hmm. What about public participation in electoral matters? Would you say this was satisfying?
I think the satisfaction really is the evaluation of the Kenyan people, and I think they themselves showed the level of interest that they see in these elections. There is always the possibility for politicians, for other actors to do more to interest the electorate. And we also know that it is an active voter registration process, so people actually have to go and be proactive about registering. And so voter education and elements like that are very important.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of ensuring that, there is proper gender representation in the voting process, do you think this was done accordingly?
Yeah, I think we recognize that the 2010 Constitution is really a very fundamental document that's very progressive, and it has many elements which have still not been instrumentalized, and the 2/3 gender requirement, which is provided for in the Constitution, still needs to be supported with legislation that would put it into practice. And so while we have seen maybe some greater gender representation, some greater representation for marginalized groups, the implementation in the future of legislation that would really enable that would allow the Constitution to be the powerful tool that it should be.
Mm-hmm. And when you talk about, free, fair, and of course a credible election, because that's what matters, does this election pass your test?
Yeah, and actually we talk about credible and democratic elections because those are the principles in the international documents. So we don't pronounce ourselves on issues of freedom and fairness. And again, that is something for the Kenyan people to decide. But in terms of the principles that are laid out, as I mentioned, the fundamental freedoms have been respected. There are certain elements of the media and certain elements of the social media that could stand improvement in the future. And hopefully those are things that can be looked at by the Kenyan authorities and also by civil society and other actors.
Mm-hmm. And from the voting to transmission to the tallying. What do you make of that entire chain?
Yeah, the process is still ongoing. Our observers are still out in the field. They're still looking at these processes. And so really they were in the counts. They followed the transmission of results physically to the CTCs, and at the CTCs they've been looking at the data entry, following that now to the BOMAs. I think it's a little bit too early to pronounce on that since the process is still ongoing, but we will be issuing a final report at the end of this mission in about 2 months, and there we will have concrete recommendations that we will make, and we very much hope for the spirit of partnership to work together on those kinds of issues.
What about when you look at the technology deployed to help ease and of course to help hasten the process of voting? Do you think it was enough?
I think it can be enabling. It is something which can facilitate a process, but it's very important for citizens to understand what that technology does and also that it operates properly. We understand that in some polling stations there were some delays because fingerprints couldn't be recognized immediately, and so there were different layers that the equipment then resorts to, but that sometimes then creates a waiting time for other people who had to queue for sometimes long periods of time. And so the technology should really be viewed as something which enables the process rather than hinders it.
And when you look at security, are you convinced that there was enough security to ensure that the voters, they go around their business unperturbed?
We did have questions in the forms that our observers fill out, and they did note that security was present during the opening, during the voting, during the counting, and I think those officers were trained before the election, and so we very much hope that kind of professionalism continues in the coming days and in the coming years.
When you look at this election, do you see anything that can be emulated by the world out of this election?
Yeah, I think the energy and the dedication of the Kenyan people is something which is really enviable, and I think many countries, especially in European countries like myself, suffer from a lack of attention or a lack of public involvement, and I think here Kenyan society really takes these elections seriously. They really look forward to the results, and we very much hope that those results are peaceful and lead to a credible result.
And finally, before I let you go, Beata, on a scale of 1 to 10, what number would you assign this election?
Yeah, that's a very complicated process, and I think unfortunately numbers don't do it justice. It's really about the extent to which those principles are met, and also the full process which we're still observing, but hopefully in the final report we'll be able to give much more information about.
Then would you say it was good, fair, bad? What would you say?
I would say that it respected fundamental freedoms, and there are still certain procedural challenges which remain.
Very good.
Thank you.
Beata, thank you very much indeed for finding time to be with
Asante
us this
sana.
evening.
Thank you.
Asante sana. All the best. Well, Dr. Beata Martin Rozumilowicz is the Deputy Chief Observer, European Union Observation Mission for Kenya 2022, joining us here to give us a preview of what her team has found in regard to this election. And of course, she has said very well, there are areas of improvement, there are areas that we have perfected this game, and of course, the report would definitely be out very soon. We want now to take you back to Broadcasting House, but remember, we are still keeping an eye at the National Tallying Center, where IEBC Chair Wafula Chebukati is in a moment from now expected to come and brief the nation on the ongoing tallying process. This is going to be his second briefing of the day, so do keep it right here for you to get to understand what's happening. Back to you, Kamte Menza in Broadcasting House.